Hello guys, you're welcome once again to my channel, and this is going to be part 4 of our React Native Contact Manager series, where we'll be consuming the Laravel API we built for the Contact Manager series for our React front end. In today's video, basically, we are going to be looking at login and registration, all right? So we're going to be going through a lot of things like authentication, like registration, like validation. So we're going to be validating for when the user enters the correct text or email and all that cool stuff in this video. Okay, so before I get into any of the content of this video, I just like to say here that if you have not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the likes button and turn on the notifications bell for whenever I create a new video. Okay, so without any much talking, let's get straight into the content of this video. So right now, the first thing that I did before I actually started this video, as you can see, is I had installed all my dependencies and I had also done pod installed. So if you head over to GitHub and then React Native Contact Manager, package the JSON, you're going to see all the dependencies that we are using. And I had to update the dependencies as I had issues building this application. Okay, so all you just need to do is pull all these dependencies, and then I think the only dependencies here that you will not be pulling off is React here and React Native, right? If you install the latest version of React Native as at the time of making this video, then every other dependency here, you just pull them here and then run yarn install if you're on yarn, or npm install if you're using npm, and all the dependencies should be installed successfully. And then once you have done that, you would need to just check into your iOS directory like this, and then run pod install, right? And then once you run pod install, it's going to install all the iOS dependencies. You can see here that we are having saying pod installation complete. There are 53 dependencies for the pod file and 44 total pod installed. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to explain each and every one of the dependencies that we are using here. So React Native Async Storage is basically going to help us with storing things like tokens on the mobile device so that we can call them up whenever we need them on the phone. Toolbar Android works hand in hand with React Native Navigation, and so that would bring us to React Native Navigation bottom tabs, which we would use while creating our bottom tabs for our application. Then we'd obviously need React Native Navigation Native whenever we are trying to use anything about React Navigation. And then React Navigation Stack, which just helps us with the stack aspect of React Navigation, basically stacking things between our components. And then fetch intercept, which would be useful to help with intercepting HTTP requests whenever there is a failed HTTP request. Formik is going to be used for input validation. Native base is our UI component. React content loader is going to be used to display skeleton text, as well as React loading skeleton. We're going to be using React Native Communications to basically handle things like making calls, text messages, just some basic stuff. So whenever the user clicks, it will redirect the user to his mobile device to send a text and stuff like that. React Native Formik, which is also for form validation, works together with Formik. React Native Gesture Handler would also be needed while we're using React Navigation. Then React Native Image Picker would be used because we would need to basically either work with the user's camera or basically like get an image from the user's device. Then international phone input would be what we'll be using for the user's phone number. React Native Loader Spinner is basically just a spinner that shows for waiting period. React Native Options Menu is the options menu that you see if you watch the second video in the series, so to give us an ability to select options. And then React Native Phone Input 2, it would also need this tool to help with working with phone numbers. Then React Native Reanimated also works really well with React Navigation and React Navigation's animations. Same to save area context, React Native Screens. React Native splash screen will be used for our splash screens. React Native SVG would be used for our skeleton text, so basically for our display of our skeleton text. And React Native Vector Icons is responsible for our icons. React Redux for state management, Redux state management, Redux Tongue, our state management middleware. Okay, so that is just an overview of every single package here that we installed and that we are going to be making use of. Okay, so next up is I'm going to head over to our app.js right now. And in our app.js, I'm going to basically just get rid of all this in here. And then also we are going to get rid of every single thing in here, so we don't need this section anymore. And yep, we don't also need this. And I could also just get rid of this too. Let me just do this way, right? And we don't even need this either. So, and for our styles, we don't also need this, at least, yeah. So what we can do here is we're just going to have a text here that says hello world, right? And let's import text, and this is going to be from React, right? React Native. Okay, so we'll save this, and yep, we have our text right at the top. All right. What I'm going to do now is we want to create our folder structure. And the first thing we want to do here is we want to create our source directory. And then in our source directory, we are going to create our main.js. And then we would also have our store. We'll have another directory here too that we would call services. And then we would have a file here that would call create store. So this would be responsible for creating our Redux store. And sorry, I made a mistake here. Let's just call this create store. And then we would also add our HTTP interceptor. Okay. Okay, let's just leave. Okay, yeah, we'll need one more directory here called pages. All right, so let's just stop here. And in our main.js, let's create a new functional component. So I'm going to call RNFE and then hello world. This is main app. Let's just put this in here. So I'm going to save this right now, and I'm going to head back over to our app.js. And in our app.js, I'm going to just get rid of this. And then let's call our main, and we need to import this here. Import main from, right? Am I making any mistake? Main, yes. Okay, so yep, we're importing our main in here. Okay, so I'm just going to save this right now, and we have the hello world blah 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 from our main. Since we are going to be using native base, one of the things about native base is that you would have to wrap like your whole UI inside a root component. So I'm going to wrap this around a root component, and this root component would come from native base. So I'm going to import root from native base. And now that we have this wrapped around our root component from native base, one of the things I really like to do is to load up our icons. So to do that, we are going to import and design, and then ion icons, feather, material icons, and this is going to come from React Native vector icons. Okay, so now let's just save this right now. Let's see if this exists. This doesn't exist. Okay, so that means this is, oh, I'm always forgetting. Okay, so what we'll do instead is we'd have to import them one after the other. So I'm going to import ant design, right? And this is coming from React Native vector icons and design. Yeah. And then next up is going to be ion icons. And this is going to come from React Native vector icons, ion icon. And the next up is that we would import feather, right? And this is from React Native vector icons, feather, and then material icons. And this is also from React Native material icons, not material community icons. Material icons, yes. Okay, so now that we have imported these icons, what we want to do now is we want to load them. So basically, this the load font, and this is a promise, so we just have that then, and since we are doing nothing, we'll just leave it there. Then next up is ion icons, load font, and then we'll have that then, and then it would just stop here too. Feather icon too, the same thing. Sorry, yeah, feather the load font, yeah, but then, and then we have material icons, which is the last, that load font, but then. Okay, so right now we are going to save this as we have successfully loaded our fonts, and we have wrapped our application inside of our root for our native base UI package. Okay, so after setting this up, the next thing we want to set up is going to be our pages. So right in our pages, we are going to create some directories in here. So I'm going to have a new folder here, and this is going to be our dashboard. So all our views for our dashboard will be placed in here, and then we'd have another view for our loading screen. Another folder for our loading screen, and then also would have another folder for login, which is going to be one of our major focuses. And then we'll also have another folder for register. Okay, so we have login, register, loading in our dashboard directory. The next thing we want to do is we want to basically just create, let's just create single files in here and then export them. So we're just going to start off with login. So I'm going to create a login.js, and also I have another file here. It's going to be our index.js. Basically our entry point, and then for our register, would have our register.js, and then here we would also have our index.js. And login, register, loading screen. Yep. Let's call this loading screen.js, and then we'll have another file here called our index.js. And basically for our dashboard, we are not going to do anything in here, just not yet. The reason is because our dashboard is going to have our components for our create contact, view contact, edit contact, search filter contact, and all that cool stuff. So in our login.js here, I'm going to create a functional component. So RNF, yes. And in here, I'm just going to have a text here that says login page. And then I would export this in here. So I'm going to export this whole directory, and I'm going to set our default here. So export default to be this login here. So basically, whenever this login directory is called, we are going to call this component, this login component as the default component, or this login file as default file. And then in our index, we are also going to have RNFP, yes. And then this is going to be our register page. And in here, we would have export default from register. And okay, so we have our login and we have our register. So we are going to go into our main.js and we are going to be setting up our routes. So, okay, sorry, I did miss out on our loading screen. So let's just do something in our loading screen here. So just call this loading, and then in here, export this. So export default loading screen. And I'm going to save this right now, and I'm also going to save this. So basically, we have set up our loading screen, our login, our register with just like very basic templates. So what we want to do now is we're going to head over to our main.js, and right in our main.js, we are going to set up our navigation for our application. So basically, we are going to set route names for components using React Navigation. And the first thing we want to do, let me just do this right now, is right at the top here, we want to make use of the Stack Navigator. So I'm going to have, I'm going to say stack, and here we're going to have our create Stack Navigator. Yep. So our create Stack Navigator, which is imported from React Navigation stack. And then we are going to make use of our Stack Navigator to basically define the name and then our components. So basically the name of the route and then the components that we are targeting. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to get rid of this. And then in here, we would need a navigation container. So basically, we need a navigation container because whenever you are creating, whether it be stack navigation or tabs navigation or draw navigation in React Navigation, you usually wrap everything inside of something that is called a navigation container. So I'm going to get my navigation container from React Navigation native. And right in our navigation container, we're going to start off here by defining our navigation. So I'm going to say stack our screen, or okay, let's do it this way. So let's just destructure a screen here so that that looks a bit cleaner. So now we have our screen, and then the name here, we'll call this loading screen. And then the component, basically the component that we are targeting is going to be our loading screen component. So our loading screen is going to be the first, and then the next is our register screen. And yep, so name would have register, component would be register, right? And then the last screen that we are going to define for now is going to be our login screen. So we have component here, and then this is login. Okay, so we have defined our login and our register screen. One more thing I'd like to do is if I save this right now, so you can see right now, this is a blank screen. Why is this blank? This is not supposed to be blank. So, okay, I think we missed out on something here. That's why that's blank. So we missed out on the navigator. So the navigator, yes, navigator container, and then we can specify the navigator container. Yep. So yes, so right now you can see this header, and on our login screen, we basically don't want this header to appear here. In fact, personally, throughout the application, we don't want this header to appear. We want our own custom header to be created. So in order to get rid of that, in our navigator, you can pass parameters here. I'm going to call screen options, and I'm going to pass the header shown parameter, and then this will be set to false. I'm going to save this right now, and then you can see that that header no longer exists. What we just have is the loading text, and since this is the first in the stack, this comes up, right? Then what we would do next is would have to get into making our loading screen look a lot better. So let's just head over to our loading screen. And in our loading screen, we want to keep things really simple. So all we'll just do here is we'd have a view, and then within our view, we would have an activity indicator. So basically, an activity indicator is like a loader. So it just loads, and then it shows 400 different from iOS. And then we basically want like a large activity indicator. So I'm going to save this right now. And you would not really see this. So we'd have to style this a little bit for things to look really nice. So the first thing I want to do is I want us to create a file here. So this file is going to handle our JSX styling. And I'm going to call this styles.js. And in here, I'm going to export our styles. And this would be our style sheet create. So our style sheet create method, and then in here goes all our styles. Let's just import this from React Native. We need to import style sheet, right, from React Native. And then in here, the first thing I want to do is in our view here, I'm going to have let's define a style here. And then I'm going to call this styles, and this will be imported from our styles, and I'm going to call it container prop that does not exist, but then we are going to create that prop here. So in here, I'm going to have a container, right? A container prop. And for our container prop, our background color. So our background color, I want the blue color of the app. So the RGB for this color is 63, 81, 181. All right. So that is the RGB for this color. And yep, I'm going to set this as the background. And okay, sorry. Oh, wait, let me just do it this way first. So now let's set this as blue, right? And the bottom should be 0. Width basically would be 100%, right? Height would be 100% too. And then we also, let's just leave this as a blue. Let's save this right now. Okay, so you can see that this covers the whole of our screen. So I'm going to change this back to RGB color. So RGB 63, 81, 181. So we just have like this nice, I don't really know what the name of this color is. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is our loading screen. So for our loading screen, I'm going to basically style two things for our loader here. So this view that houses our activity indicator as well as our activity indicator. So for this view, I'm going to hand over name here. So I'm going to call this center content. And then in here, I'm also going to add a style here. And I'm going to call our styles dot activity. Let's call this activity position. Okay, so let's just create our center content and our activity position. So I'm going to save this and head back in here, and then we'll have our center content, and then also we would have our activity position. Let me place that comma here. And for our center content, the first thing I want to do here first is let's make this display as flex, and then we want to justify content to the center, and also we want to align items to the center as well, right? Yep. So this is at the center. So I think we basically wouldn't need this anymore. Yeah, I figured that out. We won't need this anymore. So let's just get rid of this, as we have already done just these two things there. And get rid of this. Okay, so this is all we have to do for our loading screen. So basically our loading screen loads. After our loading screen, we want to design our login screen. But before we get into designing our loading screen, basically the essence of this loading screen is to check to see if there is a token existing on our app. Then we could redirect the user to say maybe the login screen, or to redirect the user to say the dashboard. Okay, but right now we have not really implemented the basically the aspect of the authentication flow. So basically authentication process and stuff like that. So what we can do here right now is to just simulate the flow. We're going to use the use effect. So basically, if you're just new to React, so use effect is more like a a function that runs immediately. Either immediately your component loads, it can run, or say maybe it can run based off certain parameters that you pass, or it can run when you are closing your when you are leaving your component. So right now we're just going to make use of the use effect when we are getting into the component. So here, if you leave this as blank, then it says it only runs once, right? So if you pass a parameter here, it runs every single time, say based on that parameter. All right. So or based every single time there's a change on that parameter. So right in here, what I can do right now is I'm going to say set timeout. So I'm going to use JavaScript set timeout. Set timeout in just two seconds. And then what I want to do basically is I want to redirect the user to the login screen. To do that, we would need to use our navigation. So we're going to make use of the use navigation hooks that came with React Navigation 5. So this is going to be the use navigation hook. And then I'm going to call navigate. And for navigate, we are going to head over to our login. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And can't find variable use effect. That's because we have not imported this here. So just import use effect at the top here. And I'll save that. And what will happen after 2 seconds, it redirects us to our login page. Okay, so now let's head over to our login page and design our login page. So right here in our login page, we're going to come over here. And the first thing I like to do in our login page is I basically would want to create a component here. So, sorry, not a component, but a new folder that I would call component. So basically this folder is going to handle our components, our components that we're going to import into this login here. So in our components, I'm going to have a new file here that I'm going to call login form.js. And then I'm also going to create another file here, not a folder, sorry, but I'm going to also create another file here that I would call header.js. And our header in our login form. So in our header, in our login form, I'm going to create a new, sorry, not render. So RNFE functional component called login form. And then this is the form. And then in our header, RNFE, and then we'll just say this is the header. Okay, save this and then save this. And in our login, we are then going to do things this way. So I'm going to wrap this inside a container, so native base container, and then I'm going to call our header component. And why did you not import our header? So let's import header from, okay, so from component and header. So we are also going to call our login form here too. And yep, we have our login form and then we have our header. So I'm just going to save this right now. And then, yep, you can see the two text right at the top. So the first thing we want to do here is work on our header. So right in our header here, we are going to get rid of this. And then we are going to make use of native basis header. And we're going to import header. I'm going to call this login header as login header, right? And then this is going to come away from native base. So we are importing native basis header and calling it login header. And that is what we are going to use as our root here. So login header. Then we would also need to align things to the left. So we'd use things here like left and then right. And then the last is going to be the title. Okay, so we have left, the right, and then the title. So in here, we're just going to have nothing in the left basically. So I'm just going to call this left. And then we need our body. So I'm also going to import the body, right? And then in here, I'm going to call our body. And in our body, I'm then going to call our title. And then here we'll say login here. And then outside of our body, which is going to have our right here. Yeah. Okay, so this left and this right is just to like, it's more like saying if you were to style this using JSX styling, it would be like, say, you would say something like justify content space between, so that every single item just aligns from the left to the center and then to the right. So I'm going to save this right now. And yep, here we have our login here, right at the middle. So let's just head over to our login form and then start styling our login form. Okay, guys, so right in here in our login form, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to get rid of this text. And then in here is where everything is going to go in. Okay, the first thing first is I want to make use of formik. So we want to use formik. Yep. And then we are going to close our formik tag like this. Right, so in here, the first thing we want to set is our initial values. And then the second is going to be our validation. So basically what we want to validate here. And I'm going to create a function here and just call this function validation. Okay, and then just pass that in here. Okay, so the next thing here is we want to specify basically what we want to have access to from formik. So here we want to have access to errors because we want to display the errors. We want to have access to touch so that we can trigger errors if the user touches a particular input. Then handle blur, which is responsible for handling blur and methods, and then handle change, which is responsible for whenever there's a change, we can call this function. Okay, so now that we have specified these parameters, we can then just wrap this. Okay, so in here, this is exactly where every single thing is going to go in. So here we have an error saying unexpected token. Did I make a mistake somewhere? Okay, I'm not sure. Let me see. So let's get a view in here. Oh, okay, I think I've seen where the problem lies. So basically, we don't need this guy here, right? Yes, so we don't need it. So let's just keep this way. And then right before the end of formik here, we are going to close this like this. Okay, so all our views or every single thing for our login form is going to come in here. So basically all our input. And so the first thing here is I'm going to make use of a lot of things from native base. So I'm going to use an item from formik here. And then this item would use a floating label parameter. And yeah, let's close this item, floating label. And then in within this item, basically, we are going to have, we're going to write our label. And of course, it's also from native base. And this label here is going to say email. And we are going to call our input too, which is also from native base. And in our input, we are also going to close that like this. And in our input, we're going to have our unchanged event and our unchanged event. So our unchanged event here would just have to have our email here, right? And then we'll put in a couple of functions here. We're also going to use our untouched start. So whenever a touch event is triggered, and then we are also going to have a function. But for now, I'm just going to log this to the console. And then we will also get on blur. So basically, whenever there is a blur, we want to make use of formik's handle blur. And we want to pass an email here. So basically, the handle blur, whenever there's, whenever the user blurs, we want to perform a validation using handle blur, and then we'll get the errors and display the errors for the user. Okay, so the last here is the unchange, not the last, sorry, but second to the last, I guess. And then we'll call our handle change from our formik here, which are the functions that we have structured. And we are also going to call a mix of our email too. Okay, so for our value, which is also going to be needed for our initial values, we're going to be making use of one of the very popular hooks that React made available to us, which is called the use state. Okay, so right up here, I'm going to make use of use state here. And in here, I'm going to have, we're going to have fields and then set fields. So basically, we'll have the use state. Oh, okay, so this could even do this for us. So let me just change this now to fields, and then this would be our set fields. And in here we'll pass our values. So the first value in here would be our email, which is empty at the initial state, and then our password, which is also empty. Okay, so now that we have set our email and our password to both be empty, our initial values can then take this fields property. And then our value for our email here is going to be fields.email. So I'm going to save this right now. And we have an error here saying can't find variable use state. And that is because we have not imported use state yet. So I'm going to import use state. Right, this is React use state from React. Right, save that. And identify React is already been declared where. Oh, sorry, here. So let's just have use state here. And then let's get rid of this. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now. And we have can't find variable item. Okay, let's import item from here. Native base and label and input. Save that. And let's see. Okay, yes, so this is what we have. But then you can see that this is taking up the whole width. And then it is right at the top. We want it to come down a little bit. And then we want the width of things to be reduced to some extent. So what we can do is right in here, I'm going to have, we're going to have like styles. And then let's see, let's give this a width of what? Let's see, a width of 80%. And then let's give this a margin left of 10%. And then a margin right of what? 10%. So, yep. So now this moves right over to the center. And then, okay, I think one more thing we can do here is so that we just have some space between the login here and basically the header here, we can specify a margin top here. So I'm going to say margin top of, let's say 30, right? Save that. And yep, so we have this come down a bit. Right, so let me just give this 35. Now that's just fine. Okay, so now let's just get this from here. And then let's call this styles.container. All right, so we don't want this, right? We don't want this. Okay, what we want is we want these styles from where we are. And then let's just create the styles in our root. So new file and styles.js. And then let's just paste that in here, but much more than that. Oh, wait, let's not paste it yet. Let's just export styles. And this styles is going to have our style sheet, our sheet create. And now we would have like the container. And let's just import style sheet from React Native. So save this and save this too. Can't find variable style sheet where because we made a mistake here. Style sheet here. Okay, so yeah, things are looking pretty fine. We have our email field. The next is going to be our password input field. So we have an item here that has a floating label. So that's why we have like this email. Our label here in here is actually floating because we set this as a floating label. Okay, so I'm going to copy this item and we want to duplicate this for our password field. And we're going to make a couple of changes here. So the first is the label here is a password, right? In here, what we have here is password. What we have here also is password. And the fields here is, oh, sorry, I'm changing email. Sorry. Let's just leave that. All right. And then we are actually supposed to change things from here. Password here, handle password, and then handle change password. And for password fields, because we are dealing with the password field here, we need to set a secure text entry props to true, basically. So by adding the secure text entry prop, we are going to have our password fields as dot, hiding our passwords and not just like plain normal text. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now, and we have our password field here. We need to basically we need to give the content some spacing between this email and this password. And so what I can do in here is for our item, I'm going to set a prop here. Let's just call styles.margin, right? Style. And then I'm going to copy this right now. Let's head over here, and a margin top style would have a margin top of 10%. Okay, so 10% and floating label, margin top styles password, and change password, and the value should be fields.password. But right within our onChange function, we can call the setFields method, and then we'll destructure our fields, and then we'll map the email prop to the email like this, right? And let's just do the same to the password. So I'm going to copy this, and right here, set fields, and then we have password here. So this is actually supposed to be onChange text and not onChange. So onChange text, no, not you, sorry, onChange, yeah. onChange for you too, but onChange text for when we want to set the field. All right, so change text for when we want to set the field. And then let's just save this. And yep, I think we should be good to go now. So yeah, we can see that we can type in our password freely. And then here we can type in our email. So basically, the onChange text just okay. So this seems quite strange. Yeah, so let's change this to unchanged text. Yeah, and then this also works fine. So change text. Okay, so right now, after designing our email and our password input field, the next thing we want to do is we want to basically get our buttons right. So for our buttons, we are going to make use of native base here again. So native base has this button component, and so we're going to call the button, and we want full, and then we want the icon to be placed right at the left position. So we're going to call icon left. We'll close the button display, and then we want to make use of ion icons. And for ion icons, we want the name property to be person. So basically, we want the person, and then the color of our icon should be white. So hashtag FFF, and then the size, we want this to be 20 in size. And let's close that. And then right next after icon is our text. So our text here is going to say login. And for our button, we want to add a little bit of styling to this button. So I'm going to say, I'm going to call this button a submit button, or yeah, submit BTN, submit BTN. So I'm going to copy this right now. And for some reason, why? Okay, so I'm sure that we have like styles here, and up here we have imported them. So we are going to style this right now. And right for our button, we want the margin top. So we want some distance between the button at the top. And then for the bottom, we would just set 1% at the bottom here. So I'm going to save this right now, and I'm also going to save this. And can't find variable name button. So we need to import button here. Save that. And can't find variable names ion icons. So we would need to import ion icons from React Native vector icons, ion icons. And then ion icons. Save that. And now everything should work. Yep. So right now we have this icon, and then we have our login text. And so for the stuff that we're going to be adding here, we are going to be looking at this text here. So all I'm just interested in is changing the color. So color should be white. All right, save that. And then, yeah, that looks pretty good. We could go for that to say font weight should be bold. Save that. And yeah, that works just fine. Also, I want this to come from native base, not React Native. Yep, and then you can see that there's a spacing in here, which makes it look much, much better. So I'm going to cut this right now, and let's call this style login btn txt, right? And in here, I'm going to paste that, but I'm also going to copy this. And then in here, we are going to just do it this way. Yeah, and let's check this down. Now let's save this, and let's also save this. We have an error here saying style. That's because it is styles. So we save this, and now we have our login form designed. Okay, so but here are a couple of things here. So if we click this, nothing really happens. All right, so what I want to do is basically create some form of validation for this form, or basically for this login input, so that if you click this, right, we have like a couple of error messages and stuff like that, like just some cool validation stuff using formik. Okay, so the first thing I want to do here is to display our error message, because we have already set up formik to listen to handle blow and handle change events. So basically, whenever you do this and then you move out, that's a handle blow. And whenever you also write something here, that's the handle change. So before we even do any of that, remember this validation method that we created. Now it's time to make use of our validation method. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to have errors, and then I'm going to say errors.email. Right. So the first email error here is if the email field is empty. So fields.email is empty. So if it's basically an empty string, then we'll say email field is required. And then otherwise we don't want to show anything, right? It's required. And then otherwise we just leave you blank here. And why do we have this here? That's because we forgot to place this here. The next thing we want to also check is we want to check, say, if that the email that the user entered is actually valid. I'm going to head back over to Firefox, and here. Okay, so right here, this was where we put all the dependencies. And then I'm just going to go into the source here, and let's go over to pages, right? And then login and login. Okay, it will be here. Let's go over to components and login form. And I'm going to copy this regular expression that helps with email validation. And yeah, that should do. So right at the top here, so I'm just going to paste this in here. So basically, this is a regular expression that checks for email. So it takes, say, the first few characters have to be numbers, and then an @ sign, and then numbers or letters, percentage, then an @ sign, and then numbers or letters or dot sign, and then a dot sign, and then a letter which would be 3 digits basically. So we are going to say if errors.email here. And then we are going to say, basically, if it doesn't match to this, so we're going to use a test method, and we're going to call the fields the email. So if it doesn't match, then of course, we're going to tell the user invalid email address in type, or invalid email address. Otherwise, we just keep things as a blank text, right? Then the last is going to be the password. So basically for the password, we just have one validation to do here, which is that if the password is empty, so it feels the password is empty, then we are going to tell the user that the password field is required. So password field is required. Okay, and then this should do. So we have password, we have email, and stuff like that. So I'm going to save this right now. And then the next thing we want to do after this is we would like to display the error messages. Okay, so to do that, right after our item for our inputs, I'm going to use a label here. And then our labels would have like our error messages, or would display our error messages. So right in our label here, going to, yes. So basically, if there's an error, so if there's error email, right? Or there's a touched error. So basically, if there is an error for email, and then there's an error when it is being touched, right? Or there's an error for email. After doing this for our emails, we also need to do this for our password too. So let's just scroll down to our password. And this time around, it's going to be errors.password, right? It's untouched password, and then errors password. And here we are missing to return this value here. So let's just return errors. Okay, that's fine. Now let's save this. And now let's see what happens. Okay, so you can just see basically that if I type in a valid email here, then I moved on, you can see that that goes away, right? You can see that that goes away. Yep. Okay, and then once I start to type here, the password error is still present. That should not be. What are we checking? So basically what we are checking is we are saying that if field password is empty, we want to show an error message. Otherwise, we want to be plain about things. And then if I look here, we have set fields for our password, which is mapping our password. Okay, sorry. So our value here is password. And we're going to remove the unchanged text here because we already have an unchanged text within this input so that we don't have things conflicting. Save that right now. And then our password field works just fine. And yep, our errors too also work just fine. So you can see invalid email and then password field is empty. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to give this error message like really nice colors, like red colors and stuff like that. So what we can do here is we're going to style this our label. And so here I'm going to give this a style and the color would be red. And then let's just give it a font size of 14. Save that. And yep, you can see that this just shows just fine. So I'm going to get this off, right? And then in our styles here, I'm going to call this label error. And then in here, I'm going to say styles.label error. Save this and copy this right now and also save this too. So we're also going to do the same thing too for our here email. Okay, so right now we have our invalid email address and our password field is required. What I want to do is I like to say like make this look a little bit much better. So if I were to type in an email that is correct, right? I don't just want this to just vanish off. I also want this to be green in color. So when things are not right, it is red. And when things are right, it is green. So what I'm going to do right now is let's just start off with the email first. So I'm going to create a reference to this item so that we can access this item. So I'm going to use reference and I'm going to call this reference email login. And then, yes, this is going to be mapped to this component here. All right, so now that we have this reference, the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to create a function here and I'm going to call this function set bottom color. Okay, so basically what this function is going to do is if the email that the user types is correct, then it would set the bottom color to be green, and if the email is not right, to set things to be red. So our set bottom color here is going to take a couple of parameters. So the first is going to be our item reference, right? The next is going to be the text that the user has typed. And then the last is going to be the type of the element itself. So if it's a password type or if it's an email type, basically. All right, so we're going to specify the element type here too. So if the element type is an email, so this is going to be a custom function. So if if basically the element type here is an email, then we want to do something here. All right, but then if the user does not specify any kind of element type, then we want to also do something in here. So if the element type is an email, we are going to call our email check regular expression. And we're going to test for the text that has been typed, which is the value. And then we're going to say if this reads as false. All right, so if this reads as false, then we want to set the bottom of the input to red. So we're going to use the item reference, and then we're going to get the native props, so set native props. And here in our native props, we want the style props. And for the style props, we are going to set the border bottom color to red. So basically, if the email is not correct, we are setting the border bottom color to red, right? But then if the email is right, then we're going to set the border bottom color to green, right? So this is going to be changed to green. And we're also going to do the same thing in here. So if the element type is null, then we're going to check for a couple of things here. So basically, if the user doesn't set like specify what kind of element type, all we just have to check is to check if the text type is empty. So basically, if the text input is empty, so let me just let me do. If text type is an empty string, so if text type is an empty string, then we want to set the bottom props to red, meaning, yeah, there's an error. Otherwise, we want to set the bottom props to, yes, to green, which means that it worked perfectly fine. So we're just going to scroll down to our email here. Remember, we have this reference here called email login. And then right in our unchanged text, I'm going to call set bottom color. And our set bottom color, the first it takes is the item reference. So our item reference here is our email login. The next thing it takes is the field, the value basically. So the text type. So we're going to have fields, the email. And then the last props that it takes is the type. Now remember, we said that if the type is an email, then we want to check based off this regular expression and not just check if the text input is empty. So I'm going to save this right now and import export may only appear. Oh boy, okay, sorry. So we don't call this. Let's just call this, yes. All right, so let's see what happens. You can see right now that if I enter because the email is red, you can see that that is wrong. Now, what will happen once the email starts to go right? You can see that the bottom props changes to green. Okay, so let's just do the same thing too for our password. So we're going to call this set bottom color function. And then we are going to call this on our item here. All right, so on our unchanged text here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give our password a reference. So item here, and then this would be password login. Okay, so basically we have email login and then we have password login. And in here, we're going to change this to password login. And the fields is fields.password. And then here, we would set this to null, basically. Right? I'm going to save this right now. And now what will happen? Now you can see, right, that as I start to type my password, it works. But then what you get out of here, and this should change. Okay. To fix that, we would have to add this event to our untouched start. So we also have to add this to our untouched start so that, our untouched start, so that the same thing too works fine. So in our untouched start, let me get rid of this. Fix that in here. And then we'll also do the same thing too for our email on our untouched start. All right, save this right now. And now let's see what happens. Touch is here. Now type A, and here you can see it's changed to green. Just type anything and it's red. And then get rid of all and leave, and then it's red. Okay, so we've perfectly designed our login form. There's just one more thing that we would need to do, but I'm going to leave that particular aspect for when we want to submit this form. Okay, so now let's just head straight over to designing our registration form. But before we go even into design our registration form, I'd like to do something here, because we would need this set bottom color and email check regex in our registration form. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to create a directory in here, and I'm going to call that new directory helpers. And in our helpers directory, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this component helper form. So basically, this is going to be our component helper function. And in our component helper function, I'm going to move these two functions. Okay, I'm going to move the regular expression and then this function here. I'm going to move that in here, and I'm going to export this function. And I'm also going to move our regular expression to over here. And I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to import them both here. So let's see, let's call set color, and then this imports that for us. And then let's also import our email check regex. Yes. Now this should work fine. Save this, and right, so type this and then see it's changed to green. But then we still have our password field here is required. This is not imported properly, so let's go to component helper functions, and yep, let's export this, right, and save that. So let's move over here, and you can see that's required. That is off. Okay, let's clean this up, and let's move over here, and that is required. Okay, so this should do for our login form. Let's just head straight over to our register. form. So to move over to design our register form, we would have to create more like a navigation link so that the user can click and then he would be given the opportunity to move over to the register form. Okay, so to do that, we are going to scroll down here. And right after our button here, I'm going to add another button. And this button is obviously going to be full, right? And then the icon will be at the left. But this button will be transparent, which is really important. And then we'll close this button here. And then this would have our native-based text input. And this would say, click here to register. Okay, so if I save this right now, you'd see, yeah, so it's saying click here to register. Okay, so we have this warning that keeps coming up. So to just get rid of that warning, I'm going to use logbox. Logbox. And then here I'm going to say logbox of ignore all warnings. And yep, that should disappear. Okay, so now let's just head back over to our login form. And here, let's make this a small letter click. Oh boy, what am I doing? Yep. So right here, we want to add a function here on press that would go to register page. Okay, so I'm going to copy this right now. And then I'm going to go over here. Let's see, we have this function. And before we can do this, remember, we would have to import the use navigation hook, navigation. And then we'll have to import the use navigation hook. And then right here, we would then say navigation.navigate. And then we want to move over to register. Right, save this right now. And then if I click here, you can see that we have moved over to the register page. So let me just close all this and then let's head over to register. So we're going to do very similar things that we did in our login here. So we're going to have a new folder here, and then this would be our component. And in our components, we're going to create, our header.js, as well as our register form.js. And basically things are just going to be very similar. In here, I'm going to copy this right now, and then I'm going to paste that in here. But then I'm going to change this to register header, and I'll rename this to register header, and I'll rename this to register header. Right, so we have register header here, and then I'm going to change this text to register here. Okay, I'm going to save this right now, and for our register form, we're going to create a new component. Yep, and then this will be register form. Save that, and then in our register here, we're going to do the same thing that we did in our login. So basically, let's just go to, there's no need, let's just do it here. So we would need the native base container, right? And then we would need the header, and oh boy, this, let's just import header from. So this would come from components, and then this is header. So let's call this header here. And then our register form. Okay, and then we'll just save this right now. And then we have register here. So we're going to head over to our register form. And a lot of the things that we did in login is what we are going to be doing for register. So basically what I want to do is I'm going to get over to login form, and I'm going to copy this right now and get over to our register form. And then I'm going to paste this here. But then we want to change things here to register form. And we want to also export register form instead. Okay, and let's save this right now. And then we have a problem here that there is no styles. Okay, so we would create a styles.js here, and we'll be using the same styles for our login here. So I'm just going to copy this right now, and then I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so now click here to register, and yeah, just the same thing, but we're going to do a couple of changes in our register form. So we're going to increase the number of fields. So we're not just dealing with the email and the password right now. So we're going to add a couple of parameters here. So I'm going to say first name and last name, and then the email and password. So we are going to then duplicate a couple of things here. So first off would be duplicating the whole email and the error message for email. And then we would do that here. We have to change this to first name login. So let's change this to first name, or yeah, first name, that's fine. And here we change this to first name on change text. And of course, here would be first name. And this would also be first name too. And then our function here, this would be first name. And the fields that will be validating again, so would be first name. And the reference for this element is first name. And here too, okay, why is this saying password login? Okay, looks like we made a mistake here. For email, untouched that should be email, not password. This should be email login, right? Email login, not password login. So let's save that, and now let's come back in here, and then this should be first name, fields, the first name. Here would have first name, and here would have first name and fields, the first name. And here would have errors, the first name, and touch the first name, and errors the first name. Okay, so let's just add this in here. So the validation for first name is really simple, right? Is we want to check to see if first name is empty. So if first name is an empty string, then we want to say if first name field is required. Otherwise, just get an empty string, and then same goes to last name. So if last name field is also empty, then we also want to say last name field is required. Right? Otherwise, we want to return like a blank message. Okay, so we have done this for first name, and now let's do this for last name. So let's just change this little to first name, and then let's do the same for last name. So I'm going to copy this right now, and I'm going to paste this here, and then we are going to change things here to last name. And for this reference, I'm going to change this to last name, and here would be last name, and this would be last name, and this would also be last name. And this, oh man, this is actually supposed to be null since we are not validating against an email, basically. So let's just make this null. Okay, so we have not first name, but last name. So let's change this prop. The value that on change text would hand over to us to last name so that things are uniform. So here we have last name, right? And then let's change this here to last name, then fields the last name, right? And null, and here we would also change this to last name. Here would be last name, and then the value would be fields the last name. Okay, so for the errors, we are also going to change this to last name, and the last of them also would be last name. And now let's save this. And yep, we have the first name, last name, email, and password. Okay, we want to change this from login to register, and click here to register to be click here to login. So let's change this to click here to login, and then change this to register. And then here would be go to login page. So now let's change this to go to login page. Okay, so we have all this set up perfectly. Let's click this to see. This does not go to login page, sorry. So navigation.navigate, and this should be login. And let's save this right now. So right now we have successfully accomplished design our login and our registration form. So now let's head straight over to basically submitting these forms. So what we're going to do now is we are going to set up what I call our HTTP service. So, but first of all, we would need to create, okay, we already have a services directory here. So let's create our new file here called our HTTP service. And in our HTTP service, we're going to create all the functions that we are going to make use of, whether it's to post data, to get data, to delete data and all those cool stuff. So in our HTTP service, we're going to have functions for post data, get data, delete data, patch data, and all that. All the the major HTTP types that we basically made use of in this application. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to create a class, and I'm going to call this class HTTP service. Right. So in here, I'm going to call my first method, and then this method will be set URL. And so what our set URL is going to do is it's going to set our URL. So basically, I'm going to say let URL be an empty string. And then in here, I'm going to return, depending on what platform the user is on. So if the user is on an Android platform, I'm going to set the URL to be something entirely separate. So I want to, let's see here, I'm going to say URL should be this. And then in here, I'm going to return the URL. So in here, if the platform is Android, then since we are targeting port 8080, and for Android to connect Android emulator to your API, you would have to set 0.2.2, and then on the port, which is port 8000, and then /API, because from our API that we designed, every single endpoint comes after the /API. Okay, so I'm going to put this in here. If it's Android, then set this. Otherwise, we want to just set the HTTP, and then we point to localhost, and then put 8000 /API. All right, so this is to set our URL. Now we head over to the first function, which is going to be our post data function. Now, post data function, of course, is going to be an asynchronous function that takes an item, takes an added URL, which we're going to append to our already existing base URL, and then it takes the post type. Okay, so basically, if you're posting data, you could either be patching, you could either be putting, or it could be a post. So that's what the post type is for. And then we want the token ID. So for now, we just set this to an empty string. Okay, so in here, I'm going to try and see if basically if a token exists. So async storage dot get item, and then we are going to target the token ID. Yes, token ID. So basically, we are trying to see if the token exists. So if a token exists, then what we will do next is we would create a request option that will pass to our fetch API. So this request option is going to call a method that we have not created yet called post request options. And this is going to pass our token. So the token that we have, and then the item, and then the last is going to be the post type. Okay, and then afterwards we can then call our fetch API. So return fetch, and this sets URL. So we are targeting the base URL, and then we're going to append the /, and then we would call our added URL, which is this here, which is the appended URL that we're going to be adding, and then we just pass our request options. So options, let me add the S to the end. And then this is definitely a promise. So we're going to have the then. And in here, we are then just going to return our response as a JSON response. Okay, so now let's create this request option function, post request option function. So I'm going to call post request options. And our post request options takes 3 parameters. So the first is the token, the next is the item, right? Token, the item, and then the last is going to be the post type. So here we are, the token, the item, and then the post type. So what we can do here is we're going to define our request options. And in here, we want to specify the method. So basically, the method is going to be the post type. So whether it be post, put, or patch, right? And our headers. So in our headers, basically, we are going to set the authorization here. So we're going to say authorization, and then we are going to call the bearer, and then we would append the token. Okay, but then what we can do here is we can say if the token is null, then we want this to be null, right? Else we want to append this. So if the token value is null, then we just set authorization to null. We don't pass any parameter. But then if the token value is present, then we set the token value. And then aside from just authorization, we also want to set the content type. So I'm also going to set our content type here. So content type would be application /JSON. Yep. And then we want to also set the body of the data. So basically the body of the data is what we call this item here. So I'm going to JSON stringify this, and then we pass the item. Okay, so this is that for our post request options. Now, the next function we're going to look at is our get data function. And this is also an asynchronous function that would take two parameters actually. The first is the added URL, and then the second is the token ID, which is initially an empty string. So what we're going to do here is we're going to basically do similar to what we did here, right? So we're going to copy this right now, and then async storage.get item, get the token, but then this will be changed to get request options, and our get request options is only taking the token as a parameter, basically just the token as a parameter. And then we would then call our fetch API to pass the URL and then our request options, and then we'll return a promise of our response in JSON. So in here, I'm going to call our get request options function, and then this is an asynchronous function. Okay, so in our get request options, we want to call our request option, just like we did for our post. And then in our request options, of course, the method here would be get the headers. So let's set the headers. So in our headers for authorization, we are going to say if the token is null, then we want to null. Otherwise, we would set the bearer and then the token value here. And that's just about that. And then next, we want to return the request options here. And we also want to return the request options here too. And then the last function we are going to look at, but I'm going to copy these two just to save some time. And then I'm going to paste this in here. So the last function here is our delete data. So our delete data also takes two parameters, the added URL and then the token ID. And it follows like the same process, except that here we have delete request options. So I'm going to change this to delete request options. And this is an asynchronous, not asynchronous, get request options to not asynchronous. I think we are missing something here. So I'm supposed to pass the token in here and post request options here, passing the token. Delete request options, passing the token too. So this is going to be delete, and then authorization remains the same, except that here we need to specify the content type. So our content type is application /JSON. And we also need to specify our content type to for get request options here. Content application JSON, content application JSON. And here, so we need to change to application /JSON. All right, so that should do now. Let's save that. And we have successfully set up this, except that we need to export this. So export class. Now let's save that, and we have set this up perfectly. The next thing we want to do is we want to basically trigger an action for our register button. So now let's just head back over to our register form. And in our register form on our button here, which has the onPress event, not here. So in here, we're going to give this an event here, say onPress, and then we're going to say register user. And now let's define this function. So I'm going to copy this right now. And then let's just head up here. Okay, const register user. And then what we can do here is we're going to console.log some text here. So I'm going to save this right now, and let's bring this up. Let's scroll to where things currently are. Okay, so right here we have this login to the console. So now let's try to hit this button, and guess what? This is logged to the console even without the user validating this form. So what we can do basically to prevent this is that we can disable this button. So basically we disable this button such that this user cannot click this button until every single field here is filled and filled correctly. So to do that, what we can do here is we would create a new state here, just specifically for handling disabling and enabling this button. And then this will be disabled, and then set disable. And then this would be our use state, and this would be true. So by default, the button is disabled. And then we'll come down here. Oh, sorry, by default, the default value that we'll set is disabled. Come down here, and then we'll set the disabled props of this button to disable. So if I do this now, you can see that this button is disabled. We no longer have access to this button. All right. But here is the problem. Even when these text inputs are all filled correctly, right? So even when we fill everything as expected to be filled, gmail.com, and then we enter the correct password here, right? This input is still not free for us to use. So basically what we can do is we can enable this button, or we need to enable this button once all text inputs have been properly filled. Okay, so I think I am noticing a weird behavior here. And as you can see, even though the text input is empty, the input element is not having like the red line is still green in color. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to add set bottom color to the onBlog event as well as to the onChange event. Let me pass this as a props. And then, now I'll handle blur function in here. So what I'm going to do is let's pass this first name here. And then I'm also going to pass the set bottom color props here. So basically, because this is happening only as a result of whenever we blur things. So here's what I mean. If I type this, and then if I blur, right, you can see that this is still green, not red. So I've set the bottom color whenever we have blurred things. So if I save this right now, now let's see what happens. So I type this, I get rid of things, and then I move, and then yep, our error shows. So we want to also do the same thing too for, let me copy this, set bottom color, and then let's do the same thing too for the last name. So on blur, yep, in here, let's set this to this props, and then this would take last, and then we'll pass the props here and here. Okay, so we have the first name, the last name. We'll also do the same thing too for the email on blur, right? And so in here, and so here would be email underscore login. We should change this to email underscore register just to keep the naming conventions clean. So email register, change this to email register. So email register, and yep. So that should do nicely. And then here on blur too, we'd also have to change this to password register and not password login. And yeah, password register. Okay, so on blur here too. And then let's pass the password param here. And then pass this in here. Password, and then here should be password register. Okay, so we have fixed that. Now let's just do the same thing too for login form. So let's head over to login form. So just before we continue, so on blur here, I think we missed something here. For our register email, this shouldn't be null, right? This should be the email. Let's save that. Okay, so now let's get back over to our login form. And in our login form, within our onBlock function here, we would pass our param here, in here, and then set bottom color. And then this would be email login. And then this would be fields dot email. And I think we also missed that out here too. So this should be fields dot email. Yep, and fields dot password here. And for last name, that should be fields dot last name. So let's save this once again, and then let's head back over to login form. And in here, we have the email, right? And password, we need to do the same thing too for the password. So for the email set bottom color should not be null, should be email here. And then right here, let's do things same. And the password, right? Channel below. And then here would be password login. Here will be null too. All right. And then in our handle block, we want to pass. Okay, so now let's save this and we have every single thing, or we fixed the bug that we had. So now let's just head back over to our register form and let's work on this button that we have disabled. So basically, here we are, we have this disabled property for this disabled button, which is from this state here disabled, and then we have this set disabled. So we want to check to see if every single thing is filled before we can enable this button. Okay, so basically what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a function here, and I'm going to call this stable button, right? If fields are empty. So this would be responsible for disabling the button. So here we are going to pass a data object, all right? In this function, we're going to call a function that we have not yet created. So I'm going to call this function disable submit button. And then this function will take our data object, and then it will also take our set disables set state function. Okay, so we don't have this function created yet. So let's quickly head on to create this function. And I'm going to create this function in, okay, yeah, I'm going to create this function in here, disable submit button. Yeah, I'm going to create this function in our component helper function. So let's just copy this right now, right? And then head over to our component helper function. So the reason why I'm creating this function here is because we're going to be using this function not just for login or register, but also for creating contacts as well as editing contacts. So in here, for this function, the first thing we want to do is we want to export this function. So these are disable submit button, takes data object, and then takes the set disable. So what I want to do is I'm going to look through all the objects, right? And then I'm going to get the object property and then check if the object property is either empty or null. And so I'm going to use the for in loop since we are dealing with objects, right? And then for const, no, let's use var instead. And then I'm going to call objects in data object. So we are looking through the data object, and then in here, we are then going to start a couple of checks. So the first check is we're going to check, so before we enable the button, right? So, and this is going to be triggered every single time there is a change in any of the text inputs that have been entered, but you'll see exactly how we manage that. So here we're going to say if data object, basically, then the object props, which would give us access to the value. So if it is empty, right, or it is null. So let me copy this right now. And then if this is empty or this is null, right? So if this is empty or this is null, what we can do is we're going to just set the stable property to true. So basically, this button will still remain disabled. Okay. Okay, so the next prop we want to check is the email. So if the object that we have is an email, so basically if the object, like like when you're dealing with JSON objects such like this email, and then this has this value. So we are targeting the props here. So we're going to say if the object is an email. So if it's an email, right? So if it's an email, then we want to take our validation to another level. So we're going to say if our regular expression is here, so if not email check regex. So if basically this email is not correct, so if that is not correct, so let's just copy this data object with the objects prop and paste that in here. And so if the email is not correct, then we also want to return disable. So basically what that means is it is an invalid email. So we want to still disable this button. So if it successfully passes the email and all the other inputs, then we want to return set disable as what? True. Sorry, as false. So that means we'll enable the button. Okay, so now let's save this right now. And we have disable submit button created. So now let's come back over here. And just to be sure that this button exists here, this function exists here. So now we'll save this. And this disable submit button, we would need this disable submit button. And we're going to make use of things in a use effect. So right here, I'm going to call a use effect. And our use effect, we're going to check for whenever there is a change in fields. So if any of the inputs changes, right, then what we want to do in here is we want to call the disable buttons if fields are empty, and then we'll pass the fields as the value. All right, so this should be fine. Can't find use effect, so we need to define the use effect here. To use effects, see that. And then everything should be fine. So click on register. Now watch this button is disabled. Now let's just type correct data and what is happening? We are immediately having this enabled and can't find variable email underscore register. So let's check that out. Email register. Yep. I knew that something was fishy. So email register, reference email register. And why do we have like password login here? So this should be email register. Okay. And then password register. And here we have password login. Let's change to password register. And let's just cross check for the first name. So we have first name props, yeah, first name reference, sorry, not props. First name reference, and then last name reference. Last name. Okay, so save this right now. And we have this fine. Okay, let's see. And so we are looking through things and then we are checking to see if the data object is empty or is not, return this. Objects email, return this. And sorry, this is supposed to be outside of the loop. We want to return this outside of this loop. So now let's save this. And yep, our button is disabled. So until we enter our password here, and then that is enabled, right? So let's just get rid of our email. You can see our button is disabled again. Now let's enter a valid email, right? And then we have our button enabled. Okay, so now that we have this successfully done, the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to submit this action just the way this is now. So once every single data is in our form, we want to be able to submit this form. Okay, so to be able to successfully submit this form, we would need to perform an API request to our server. So even though we have set up our HTTP service to basically give us more like an interface to communicate with our server, we would still need to point to specific endpoints that we want to call from our server, like login endpoints, the register endpoints, and all that cool stuff. In order for us to do that, we would have to go back to our services. And in our services, so in our services here, we're going to create a new file. So I'm going to call this file service.js. In our auth service, we're going to make the register request. So here I'm going to say register service. And then here I'm going to pass the credentials. So, or basically the data, just whatever you want to call it, right? So let's just call it credentials. And then in here, const. Okay, so in here, I'm going to create an instance of our HTTP service, right? And then remember that we have a parameter called added URL. So I'm going to call added URL, and then this would be user/register. And then after that, we want to return our HTTP service, but then we want to get the post data. Now remember, our post data passes our credentials, which is first, and then it passes the second, which is sign up URL. Our added URL, sorry, right? And then it has a third param, so this is going to be of type post. And then the fourth param, which is actually an optional parameter. And then this is a promise as also. And then we have our data, right? And here we are then going to return the data, basically just return the data. Okay, so here we have our register service. And what I'm going to do now is to get Redux on board, we would need to do something in our create store. So we need to literally create our Redux store. So right now we don't have any existing Redux store, even though we have like packages that would help us make this possible. So right in here, a couple of things that we are going to import. So first we need the create store, which is the baseline for creating our Redux store. Then we need to apply middleware. And then apply middleware would be useful for applying our middleware here, which is going to be our punk middleware. And then this is from Redux, right? Okay, Redux. And then we also want to import punk. And this is going to be from Redux. So the last thing here that we would want to import, although we have not created it, is okay, no, not the last, right? But it's actually our HTTP interceptor. So basically, this is going to be responsible for intercepting every failed fetch API request. All right. So this would help us so the application does not crash or just show random errors, but rather we can customize the error, say if it was a 401 error or a 500 error and all that cool stuff. So right now we don't have this HTTP interceptor. So what we're going to do is, since we have a file here that we've created an HTTP interceptor, we're going to have to create our HTTP interceptor. So right in here, there are a couple of things that we would import first. So the first is, which is actually the package itself, which is our fetch intercept. So our fetch intercept, and this is from fetch intercept. Okay, fetch intercept. And right here, we are going to export our HTTP interceptor, and then we'll pass our store instance, and then we'll call our fetch intercept. So fetch intercept register. So we'll call the register method. And then in here, we're going to register a couple of things for our application. So the first method here is the register method. And our register method is going to take our URL and our config. And we're not really going to be doing anything in here. So all we're just going to do is just to return whatever is the set URL from our application. And then whatever is the configuration, it's more like header configurations and stuff like that. The next here is going to be the request error. So for the request error, we would also not do much except to just reject the error using promises. So basically just return a rejected version of the error. So we're just going to return, because at the end of the day, we still want to we must basically return for like every single function that we call here. So promise, reject, and then the error. And then the next function here is going to be the response. So in our response, we are going to do a couple of things here. And yeah, so in here, we pass our response, and let's just come down here. And we're going to check for the status, right? So our response usually has access to our status. So if the status is a 401, so 401 basically means that the user is not authenticated. So if it's a 401, then there are a couple of things that we want to do here. So the first of them is we want to log this user out, and we'll just call a function here, and then we're going to call this function logout service. Okay, so we're going to call a logout service function, and this is a promise. So this is going to be the then, and in here, after logging the user out, we would do whatever we want to do. But basically, we are definitely going to log out the user once we discover that his token has expired. Okay, so after logging out the user, what we also want to do is we want to show the user an alert as to why we logged him out. So to do that, we cannot do that right in here. So what we can do instead here is, since we passed our store instance, we can use our store instance for Redux and basically dispatch. Okay, so in Redux, when we say dispatch, what we are simply doing is we are like pushing forth. It's like saying I'm initiating an action. That's basically what it is. So we're going to be sending an action that we have not yet created yet. And then we're going to call this action token expired. So we're going to dispatch this action called token expired. And even though we have not created this action, let's just import this from the file path of where we are expecting this action to be created on. So token expired, we know you don't exist, but we know where you would exist, right? So this is going to be within the store, right? And then action types, we're going to add the action types. And this is going to be our auth. So our auth action type is where this is going to come from. And also, we also know where our logout service is coming from. So our logout service is coming from our auth service. So we're still going to create that function just in this very quickly, right? I will see in a second. So here we have logout service and auth service token expired action type. So basically, action types are simply it's simply like a way of specifying what type, right? Basically, the type of action that we want to dispatch, right? So usually every single action is required to have a type. So we could specify the type as a bare string, but based on like standard practice, is always advised to use like constant, so that if things change later on, you wouldn't have to have like a hassle going all around changing every single thing everywhere, like every string everywhere. Okay. So here we have this response. Whenever our response is successful, but then it's a 401, right? So after this, if it's a 500, so if response the status, basically if what we have is a 500, right, then we would just dispatch another function here, type, and then we would say, instead of token expired, we say server error. So we'd also add that here, say server error. Okay, so this should be fine. So we have specified for our response. Now, lastly is our response error. So our response error here is going to be for, like, say, some kind of errors that we don't understand basically, and then they just trigger themselves. So for this kind of responses, what we just want to do is we just want to console.log. That's just basically it, right? So we'll not really do anything much in here, just console.log things here. So console.log error. Then we also need to return our response here. Yeah, so we need to return our response here. And then here we would need to just return our response, but as a rejected promise, so promise or reject error. Okay, so now that we have done this, we would first of all need to create this logout service. So let me copy this, and please keep track with us because we are still working on the create store right here. So I'm going to save this right now, and then I'm also going to save this. And so let's head over to our auth service. And in our auth service here, we are going to write our logout service. And for our logout service, what we are going to do for our logout service is that we want to, oh, sorry, why did this take us back here? So let's get back here. And let me just be sure that nothing was affected. Okay, so let's go back to our auth service. So in here, if you look at what we did here, you see that we actually are returning a promise. So logout service.then, and then we dispatch some the token expired from the store. So here we are going to return a promise. So basically promise, and then our resolve method will be called here. So what we simply would do is we would remove async storage, remove item. So we're going to remove the user item that would be stored on the user's device, and then we'll resolve this to be true. Basically, once it removes this, right? Okay, so we could await. Okay, so I don't think this is necessary. I think it would go just fine. Yep. Okay. So now we have our logout service. So now let's just head back over to our HTTP interceptor. And then the next thing here is going to be our action types. So let's just create our action types. We're going to go over to let me see, do we have a store directory yet? Pages, services, yes, store, yeah. So we do have a store directory. In our store directory, for now, we're just going to create folders here. So we'll have our actions, and then we'll have another folder here called action types. And then we would also create another new folder here, and this would be our reducers. We need to create token expired and server error, and this is going to come from action types of basically. So in here, within our actions type directory, we're going to create a new file here, and we're going to call this auth.js. And right in our auth.js, we are going to export what do we call that begin. So if I head back to our HTTP interceptor, call this token expired. So I'm going to call token expired, and this would be token expired. And then we also had a server error, and then this would be server. So save that, and let's just to be sure that this actually exists. Yep. Okay. So let me just give some space in between these two. So now that we have this defined and we have set up our HTTP interceptor, and we have also set up our auth service, basically our register service. We want to, as I said before, that what we basically are looking at is a situation where when the user clicks on the register button after he has successfully filled this form, we're going to dispatch an action, and that action will call this our register service. But basically, the action will be responsible for making the API call. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is within our store, we are going to first of all go into our reducers. And then right in our reducers, we are going to create our root reducer here. So we'll create our root reducer. So basically, our root reducer will be responsible for bootstrapping all our reducers. And then we would after we have created our root reducer and we have created and we have bootstrapped all the reducers, we are then going to go into not our app, but in our index.js, and then we're going to wrap, or in our app, any of them, and then we're going to wrap our application inside of our provider, and then we'll pass the instance of our create store, which we have not yet completed yet, right? So yeah, let's just create our root reducer first, then bootstrap it to our application. So in our root reducer, the first thing here is we'll need our combined reducer, and then this is from Redux, and then we can then say our root reducer, which is our combined reducers, and then in here we are going to need at least one reducer, otherwise this is going to throw an error. So let's just export default root reducer. So if I were to pass this to our store instance, which we are going to complete the store creation in a second, you would it would throw an error once we bootstrap this into our application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another reducer here, and this time around I'm going to call this our auth reducer. So right in here I'm going to keep our auth reducer very simple for now, just so we can first bootstrap our application. So we'll have our init state, and then here we'll have login state, and then we'll just set the value to an empty string, and then register state, and then the value to an empty string. And then token expired, right? The state, and then we'll set this to false, and then server error, and then we'll also set this to false too. So after doing this, we can then say auth reducer, and then our state will be the value of our init state, and then we can pass our action here. And we just do things this way. So what we'll do here next is we need to find a way to basically tell our reducer to dispatch, or basically to call certain global reducers based on certain premises. So we could do this with an if statement, but by standard convention, it's usually done with a switch statement. So, and I think switch statements are cleaner for things like this. So we're going to go with a switch. And then we're going to say whatever is the action type that is being called, basically whatever is the action type. So for now, we are just going to keep this clean. And then for default, we are going to return the state. So we just return the state just for now. And then now that we have successfully set up our auth reducer, we can then head over to our root reducer. And in here, we're going to say auth reducer, and then we'll map this to auth reducer. And why did this not import this for us? So let's import auth reducer from auth reducer. And let's just be sure. Oh, okay, we did not export our auth reducer. So we're going to export default auth reducer. And now, yes, so this, yes, that's it. Okay, so now that we have done this, we can then go back to complete the store creation that we were on. Okay, so right in here, we have created a HTTP interceptor, and we have given a HTTP interceptor certain action types that even though we have defined the action types, we are yet to define the way, and we have defined the action types, and now it's time for us to basically create our store and then bootstrap our store into our application. So for that, the first thing I'm going to be doing here is our middleware. So remember, we are making use of Tonk to serve as our Redux middleware. So yeah, we're going to pass our middlewares in here, and then we want to create our store with that middleware. Basically, we want to create our store with the Tonk middleware. So Tonk is going to serve as our middleware for this application. So I'm going to call this create store with middleware, and then we'll make use of the apply middleware here, and we'll destructure our middleware, which is passing our Tonk in an array, And then let me just get this. Okay. And then we would wrap our create store here. So this is going to be high order function for our create store, right? Yeah, create store. Okay. And afterwards, we can then export our store, which would be our create store with middleware, right? And then we'll call our root reducer, because our root reducer holds for every single one of the reducers that we are going to be creating here using the combined reducer. And then because we remember in our HTTP interceptor here, we are asking for the store so that we can be able to, using the store, lock the user out by dispatching an action, say whenever he gets a 401 error, or if there is a 500 error, we can dispatch like a server error. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to then call our HTTP interceptor, and then I'll pass our store. Now I'm going to save this right now, and just to be sure that this is our HTTP interceptor. Yeah. Okay. So now that we have created our store, we need to bootstrap our application with our store. And to do this, we're going to head over to our index.js, and then in here, or should we do this? Okay, I think we can do this in our app.js. So let's do this in our app.js instead. So our index.js just looks a little bit cleaner. So in our app.js, what we are going to do is we're going to wrap this with a provider. So our provider, yeah, it's going to come from Redux, and then in our provider, we're going to pass our store, so the store that we have created. Then we get this, and then just move it in here. Yep. And do we have any errors? So no, we have no errors. So that means our store has perfectly been set. Okay, so now it's time for us to head straight and then dispatch actions. So in here, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file auth action. So this is going to be our auth actions.js, or let's just action.js, right? So right in our auth action, we are going to define our first function, which is going to be our login action. Oh, sorry, our register action. So we are going to say register action, and our register action will take our register parameter. So I'll call this credentials. And yep, in here, we want to dispatch, we want to pass dispatch in this function that we are returning. And yep, the first thing we want to do is we want to call an action type here that we have not yet created, and this is going to be register loading. So basically, this is going to be loading things for our application. So say the user clicks on register, we could show like a loader while we are waiting for the data to be received. And then we'll call our register service, which we have created, and our register service would pass our credentials, and then our register service, of course, returns a promise, and we can pass the response. And right in here, we can then check to see, say, if the response has one property. So has one property is a JavaScript function for checking if objects have certain properties. So if it has one property of success, and the success property that it has, right, is true. So that this doesn't break, I'll throw this in here. So if it has some property of success and the success property is true, then we can dispatch another action here that would say register success, and then we'll pass the response value here. Okay, we can then say else if response has own property of success. All right, but this time around, if the success value is false, then we can dispatch this, right? So we can dispatch this, and then this would be register error. Okay, so we have a couple of action types here to create. The first is register loading, register success, and register error. So let's just head over to our auth.js here, and we're going to create them. So the first action type is register loading, and then here we have register loading const. Sorry. The next is register success. And so here we'll call register, and then the last of them is going to be called register error. So we'll have, okay, so we have register error, register success, register loading. I'm going to save this right now, and then within our auth actions, register error, register success, register loading. So I'm going to import them here. So let's see register error, and then we have register success and register loading. So let's just say register success and register loading. So now that we have defined our register action, I'm going to save this right now. And then we are going to head over to our register form. And right in our register form, here where we are calling register user, we would then call our register action. And so now that we have successfully created and then imported our register action types, the last thing we want to do is to create the reducers. So basically the reducers that would be, these values that have been dispatched will be stored in. So let's just head over to our auth reducer. And in our auth reducer, you can see here we have a register state, but the initial value is empty. So right here, we are going to define a couple of things. So the first here would be our register loading. So we're going to call register loading. So whenever there's a register loading action, we basically want to return, we want to destructure our state first, and then we would get the register state, and then we set the value to loading, so that whenever it's loading, we just have loading. And then next up is going to be our register success. So whenever we successfully register, we want to return the structured value of our state, and then we'll have the register state here, and we'll pass the action response. Okay, and why do we have this error here? Because of this comment. So yep, and then for register error, let me just copy this, because register error is basically still the same thing. Okay, and then I think we need to add just one more. So let's go over to our action types. So let me just action types, and here I want to add just one more here, and I'm going to call this clear register state. And then here we have clear register. So yep, this is going to be our clear register state. So let's just head back here. And then I'm going to call this right at the top. So basically, we would call this, say, if we wanted to clear whatever was the value of the register state. So if we wanted a clean slate, basically. So we would set the value of register state to be empty. And here we have an error. Why are we having this error? Because we have not returned this. Okay, so now that we have successfully defined our auth reducer, the next thing that we want to do is we're going to head over to our register form. And yep, in our register form, right in our register user function, we're going to call our actions. And right here, you would think we'll just call our register action, right? Register action, and then we'll just pass our parameters in here, and then this will just work. But that doesn't work that way, right? We still have to dispatch this action. And so Redux provided for us the dispatch hooks that we can use within components, like functional-based components. All right. So rather than just calling our store and then doing store.dispatch, as we did for our logout service, the reason we did that was because we are not within a component. So what we'll do here is we're going to say dispatch, and yep, we're going to call use dispatch. All right. Let's get rid of this. And the use dispatch, we would import that here. So our use dispatch is a hooks that is provided for us from React Redux. Okay, so then we can then just drag this around our dispatch. I'm going to just get rid of this, and then I'm going to paste this in here. Okay, so we just have one more thing before we can test this to see if it works. And you know, the fact here is, even after calling this action, this our register action is going to dispatch a couple of action types, and this action types is going to manipulate the value of certain things in our reducers. And the value of those things in our reducers is exactly what we want to display to the user. So in order for us to display those things, we need to find a way to get those things so that we can be able to display it to our user. So to do that, I'm going to head back to our login, our register form, right? Yep. So right in our register form here, the first thing we want to do is we are going to import another hooks here called use selector, which is used to get whatever we want to get from our reducer within our components. And for our use selector here, we want to get our register response. And so we'll call our use selector, and yep, like this. Okay. So let me get rid of this. And then we would say our state, and then auth reducer, basically, and then register state. So just to explain for you how this moves down the stack or down the tree, right? So our state here is our global state, right? Then auth reducer here is the alias that we have assigned for auth reducer here in our combined reducer. And then the value is this value here. So this register state value, which we passed in here as a part of our initial state. Okay, so now that we have this, we need to find a way to be able to display this to the user. so that the user can feel like he's actually interacting with the app and not just something static. So to do this, we would make use of a use effect again. So let's see, somewhere here, I'm going to make use of a use effect. Okay, so but this time around, we are going to listen for changes on the register response. So whenever there's a change on the register response, we want to perform certain actions. So we're going to say if register response is not empty, sorry, not empty, right? Register response is not empty and register response is loading. So basically, if this happens, so we then know, like if you head over to our auth reducer here, you can see that we have this loading value here for our register loading. So if it's empty or it's loading, then what we want to do is we want to show this user a toast. So we want to show this user a toast. So we're going to call our toast, right? And then our toast obviously is from native base. So yeah, our toast. And then we're going to say toast.show. And then we're going to set the position to be top. So one is to show at the top. Then we want the text to be please wait. All right. And then the last parameter here is the color basically. And this is defined by the type. So we'll call this success. So it's going to show like a green color. Okay. So this is loading, right? So if this is loading, I want to show this toast. But then if, right, so else if our register response, right, is not empty. Okay, so this is like a second layer, or our register response is not null. So it's not null, right? So, and then it's not loading. So basically, our register response is not empty, is not null, and then it's not loading. So if it passes all these criteria, then we can then check for whether it is successful or whether it is failed. It is failed, right? So here we're going to say if our register response has a property of success. So basically, and then the success property is true, then in here, we want to show our toast. So we're going to say toast, basically, dot show. And then this time around, we'll add a couple more parameters here. So the first is going to be the position. And here, I'm going to keep this to be the top. The second is going to be the button text. So the button text that we want to show, and then I'm going to call this closed, so that we just have like a closed button there so that the user can just close it if he wants and stuff like that. And then the last is going to be the type, right? Yeah, the type. And then this time around, we're going with danger, which means that things failed. And then the last of them would be, sorry, not the last, but the next would be the text. So here we want to display our register response message, right? Register response message. And so we're going to save this right now. And then if things don't go as planned, so if register response message actually is failed, so we're going to say else if here, if register response dot success is false. So in here, if it's false, the first thing we're going to check out is if the type of message that we are receiving. So if the type of message, which is type of register response message, all right, the type of message here is a string. If it's a string, then we basically want to show a toast. Yep, so it failed. So obviously we're going to use okay, this was success, sorry. So we need success here, not danger. So if it fails, we obviously would want to make use of danger, which means, yeah. So here would be danger, and then it would be the message, basically because the type of error that we are receiving as a message is a string. But then if the type of error is an object, so if the type of register response message is an object, so if the type of error is an object, then in here, we want to get the keys of the object. So object.keys, and we're going to call our register response dot message, and then we want to map the keys and then display their values. So key and then the index, and then we are going to display an error message, and we're just basically going to pick the first error message from it. So position top button text type danger, and then the message, we're going to have the keys here, and then we'll just take like the first error message here. So not keys, key actually. And I think that should do. Okay, so I'm just going to save this right now. And now let's see exactly what happens. So now let's try to register a new user. So I'm going to say, right, like gmail.com, and so it would be password, right? Now hit the register button and we don't have an interaction. Okay, so let me see Okay, we are having undefined is not evaluating request.apply. Request.apply. Oh, okay. Let's check our HTTP interceptor, and then let's change this to request, because the parameters is request error, response, and response error. Okay, so let me save this right now, and now let's try this again, and we still have the same error. Let me see in our create store. Okay, let me close this. Let me close this app and then open it once again. So let me head over to register, and now let's see Mandela Nelson 245 at gmail.com, and now let's hit the password. Now hit register, and yep, you can see here that we have registration complete, and you can see our toast just appeared showing us that the registration was complete. All right, so if I head over to our database here, you can see that neo245 at gmail.com, Mandela Nelson has just been added. All right, so let's try this again with another email address just to be sure. Neo444, and now hit register. And yep, you can see registration complete. And I head over here and I just refresh this. And you can see neo444 at gmail.com has also been added. Okay, so let's try for, say, like duplicate emails. So if I click on register, we are not getting any error message. Why? Okay, we are getting an error here saying this email already exists. Try another email. But we are not getting the error message here. Let me see. Let's just go to our auth action first. And we have register error and register success. Okay, let me see auth reducer. And okay, this is supposed to be register error, not register success. Okay, so I'm going to save that right now. And let's try this again. So this is not working. Why? Let me see. Did you import register error? No. Okay, register error has been imported. Okay. Let's head back over to our register form, and then okay, neo445gmail.com. Let me close this app right now and open it again, and then yep. Okay, so let's just we already have the email, right? So neo444 at gmail.com, and then we have this password. So let's see. Hit this button, and yep, you can see this email already exists. Try that again, and you can see this email already exists. Right? So yep, we're having an error message. Let's try 445 or this trace time user. Yep, and registration complete. And now let's try that again, and this email already exists. Okay. So now let's head over to login. Login process flow is going to be very similar to exactly what we did here for register. So the first things first is we're going to head over to login form. We don't just want this button to be accessible. We want to disable this button until this form has properly been filled. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy a lot of things that we have already done here. So first of all, I'm going to copy this disable button here, and then this use effect here. And then I'm going to head over to our login form. And yep, I'm going to paste that in here. And of course, we don't have this disable button imported yet. So I'm going to import disable button. No, disable submit button, sorry. So let's call disable submit button here. All right. Then also, we also want the disabled value. That's basically this on the button. So that we would attach that to this submit button here. So this button here that is responsible for login. And then we are going to get our use states for disable here too. And then we're also going to paste that here. Okay, save that. And we have use effect cannot be used. That's because we need to import use effect here. It's and save that again. And yep, our button is disabled. So if I fill this input correctly, yes, our button is then enabled. Okay, so next up would be the submit action for this login button. So we're going to be following very similar to what we did for register, except that we will be redirecting the user once login is correct. So here I'm going to have login user. I'm going to scroll up here and login user. And in this login user function, we want to dispatch an action. So basically, just like we did for our register form here, where we dispatched our register action. We want to dispatch our login action. But before we can do this, we'd have to first go through the same process. So we're first of all going to go into our auth, the JSR action types. And then in our action types, we're going to set a couple of things here. So first, I'm going to create the login loading action type here. And then this is login loading. And next, we would have login success, right? Login success, which would be login success here const. And let me just copy this. And here we'll have login error, and here would be error. And then last would be clear login state. Yeah. So this would be clear login state, and then this would be clear login state. Okay, so now we'll save this right now, and then we'll head over to our auth service. So moving over to our auth service, and in our auth service, we are going to define a new function here, and this function is going to be called login service. And this function is going to take in our credentials, and of course, we would have a new instance. So just same thing that we have here with register. So I'm going to copy this right now, and I'm going to paste this. But then the endpoint would be user /login. So credentials, added URL, post, then return data and all that stuff. Okay, so I'm going to save this right now, and we'll head over to our auth actions, and then we'll create an action that would handle this too. So we'll have an action here called login action that would take the credentials too. And I'm just going to copy what we have written here, because what we are going to be doing here is quite similar. So what we're going to have here, instead of register loading, is going to be login loading. And then here would be login success, and here would be login error. Login error. Okay, so we have set up our login actions. Then let's head over to our reducer, and then in our auth reducer here. And then we're going to set up a couple of things for our login state here. So I'm just going to copy what we have here right now, and I'm going to duplicate that here. And then here we have clear register state. So the first is clear. So we change this to clear login, and this would be login loading. And then this would be login. So login loading, clear login, login states, login loading. This would be for login states. Yeah. And then here too would be login success. Sorry, login success. And then this would be login state. And yep, this would be login error. And this would also be login state. Okay. So up here, we want to do the same thing here. So we have login error, login success, login loading, and then clear login state. So now that we have successfully set up our reducer, we can then head over to our login form. And here we are going to dispatch. But before we are able to dispatch, we have to create an instance of our Redux dispatch function from the use dispatch hooks. Yes. And then here we will then dispatch the login action that we created. Login action, yeah. And it takes our fields, which is our email. Sorry. Our fields. I didn't we call it fields? Yeah, field, which is basically our email and then our password. Okay, so the last thing we want to do right now is let's head over to a register form, and I'm just going to copy this function here, or this use effect here, and we'll move that use effect in here. So basically, let's get rid of this, and then see that. Yep. So we need to change everything called register response to login response. And then one more thing, which is at the top here. So we need this use selector, yes, so that we can have access to the state. And then we would import the use selector right here. After use dispatch, you have use selector. Okay. So I'm going to, I think that should be that, right? So we have login, not register. Sorry, let's change this to login response, and not register response. And then we are just going to save this right now. And then we have an error here saying toast. So we need to import toast from, let's import toast. Yes. And now that should do, save this, and everything should work just as expected. But then there's, yeah, everything should work as expected. If login response message, so let's see what happens if I, yep. So what let me go over to the database and just get the user that we registered with here. So I'm going to get, let's say, neo245@gmail.com, and I'm going to try to log in with neo, and then the passwords are always password. So log in, and nothing happens. So let me close this app and then open again. And what happens? Our app crashes. Why is our app crashing? So our app ought not to crash. Okay. Are we calling the right endpoint for our login action? Let me see. So this is, oh yeah, register service. So this is supposed to be login service. Yes. Yes, this is supposed to be login service credentials. Okay. So here, let's enter an email address. It's obviously this is the wrong email address, and we don't get to see our error message being displayed. Why? Even though we are displaying that over a toast, right? And you can see here we have error, invalid email or password with the message. So why could that be? Let's head back over to our login form, and we have a use effect here that listens to whenever there's a change in the value of our login response. And in our auth action, we are calling login loading, login success, login error. And I've imported login success, login error, login loading, login success, login error. Okay, let's see our login service. And endpoint is user login. Yes. And okay, let's go back to our actions, and then let's just see. Just calling our login service. And okay, let me see the auth register. So we have login loading, login success, login error from login state, and here we have login error, login success, login loading, clear login state. And this is login state. Where is this coming from? Okay, so here, right here. So let's change this to login state. Yes. Now we save that right now, and right now you can see invalid email or password, right? Invalid email or password. So I think I just copied somebody. Oh, okay, I didn't copy that. So let's go over to our database, and then let's get neo245, right? Copy this. Then head back over here and just paste that. Yeah, I have to paste it like this. And now we hit this button, and yep, you can see the user has logged in. That's why you cannot really see any message. All right. So basically what we can do here is the reason why there's no message is because if the login is success here, what we are doing is we are basically getting the message, and the message property here is obviously an object because we are returning two different values. So you can see here that we are returning a token that is the GWT token and then success of true. So what we can do in here is we're going to do a couple of things in here once the user logs in successfully. And the first of them is we want to store the GWT token in the user's device. So we're going to call async storage the set item, and we are using user here as our key. And then we are going to call the token value, as you can see here, the token value here of our login response. So our login response is a token K. And then the second is basically we want to redirect the user to a particular component or to like the dashboard component. So what we can do is we are going to, well, first of all, we'll create an instance of, okay, we already have an instance of navigation here. And then would say navigation, right? Navigate. And then we're going to head over to dashboard. Okay, so we don't yet have dashboard, of course. So we would have to create a dashboard. So I'm going to close saved. And first things first is, okay, let me move through here. And in this dashboard directory here, let's just create a new file. And this is going to be index.js. And then we're going to have a React Native functional component that will say this is the dashboard. Nothing fancy, just some text here. And what we can do next is we're going to register this in our screen. So here I'm going to have a screen, and then the name of this screen, right? The name of this screen is going to be our dashboard, right? And then the component here is going to be our dashboard, right? We need to import this component here called index. Okay, so let's import that. Let me type index and here from dashboard. So the component here would be our index here. And then I'm just going to save that right now. And then in here, I'm going to save this. So yep, you can see that it automatically redirects us to the dashboard. Okay. So if I close this application now, right, and then I open this application, okay, you'll notice something here. It's still taking us to the login. Even if we, let's log in again, neo245@gmail.com, and then we enter the password, right? And then we log in. Even if we log in, you see it still redirects us, right? If I were to close this and then I open it again, you still see that it will still take us back to the login page. So what we can do here to fix this is pretty simple. we would head over to our loading screen. Okay, so in our loading screen, we're going to write a little bit of logic here. So right here, you can see that we are just setting timeout to navigate straight into our login part of the application. But what we want to do here is let me get rid of this now. Or yeah, let me get rid of this. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. I'm going to call this Bootstrap Async, right? Bootstrap Async. And then this is going to be an asynchronous function. Within this use effect. And then basically what we're going to do here is we're going to get the token, the value of the token. So we say await async storage, get item, and then we're going to get the user item. And then we are going to check to see if the token is null, right? So if there is no token existing, then we want to redirect the user to the login. So basically, if he doesn't have any token, then of course we are redirecting him to the login. But then if there's a token existing, else, if it's not null, basically, we want to navigate the user to dashboard. So navigate to dashboard. Okay, why do we have this here? Why is there an error here? Bootstrap async. This is a function. Okay, let me cut this and then just Control Z things to see why that error is surfacing. Okay, yeah. Okay, so let me see the use effect. Okay, so this is set timeout. Yes. Okay, so what we can then do is we'll call this Bootstrap Async function here. So basically what happens here is it checks to see if the token exists, navigate him to dashboard. If it doesn't exist, then take him to the login screen. So if I save this right now, right, we are not on that screen, so we'd have to close the app. And so basically what happens whenever you open an app is when you open the app, right, there's usually like a loading screen. So here we would make the check-in and then it would either redirect us to the dashboard or to login. And I'm thinking there is an issue here because our dashboard is being defined, the component is indexed. So why are we stuck in our loading screen? Async storage to get item. Our async storage is not being imported though. So let's import our async storage. And now save that again. And yep, you can see it redirects us to the dashboard. If I close this so that you can see the transition, and I open this, you can see it shows our loading screen, and then straight away it redirects us to the dashboard because the token is present, right? So if the token was absent, it would redirect us back to the login screen. So guys, that would be this for this video. Thank you once again for watching, and please do not forget to subscribe to my channel. If you enjoyed this video, hit the likes button, and see you next time. Thank you.